Okay, the next question is, what are some common mistakes or pitfalls you have seen your leads make, and how can they be avoided?
I can go first here, so you guys, so I get a good shake at it. Yeah, so especially on the CRO side. So again, there's the two groups, the sponsor and the CRO. I think today we're primarily speaking about what it's like to be a lead on the CRO side. I think a lot of times there's difficulty for the lead in terms of balancing what truly needs to be communicated to the sponsor versus what can be handled internally and then presented to the sponsor. So I think a lot of times a pitfall that I see some leads make is to present a problem to the sponsor without coming with a solution, at least a potential solution attached to that problem. Like, hey, sponsor, we have this database go live. It's occurred and we're receiving these variables now, and it's not going to work out the way we thought in terms of the primary analysis. Stopping there is pretty bad. You definitely don't want to do that. You want to say, but we have solutions A, B, and C. Which of these would you like to pursue? The risk associated with each is X, Y, and Z. So always having a lead always come with identified problems is a good thing, but they have to, if and only if, they come with proposed solutions. So a very common pitfall is, I've identified this problem and I'm going to the sponsor too early. Work internally, you don't have to rush, make sure that you have all of the options identified and the risks associated with those options, and then presenting that forward. That's a big role of the lead to communicate with the sponsor, and unfortunately it's a very common area for pitfalls. Would love to hear from Evgeny on what statistical programmers might be facing.
Oh, we face a lot of pitfalls. The one I can think of, which I've seen a lot, especially with the new leads, as they say, if you want to get things done well, do it yourself. So I think this is a very common pitfall for the lead programmers and for the functional leads in general who have an extensive team. So the lead needs to learn to delegate. And this is not as easy as it may sound, because it's really painful, to change this mindset, because we're all humans and it's about control, right? It's about keeping control, and we're not comfortable when we lose this control. So, but when people finally can deal with this, when they can change this mindset, it's not long before they see the benefits of this approach, and it will make their lives be easier.
So I'm going to add to that, because what I've seen leads do is, because we want to do it ourselves, when we do delegate, we micromanage. And that is also a pitfall that we do. So that really demotivates the team that you're working with. On the DM side, there's a lot of other functional groups that the lead works with. So you have the database designers, you might have a validation team, you might have a coding team, you have data reviewers. So there's a lot of different subset of teams that the lead works with. And it's important to have that team set the expectations for them, but not micromanage them, because that can really demotivate the team and have the opposite effect of what you've wanted to achieve. My project management side is, of course, going to say not managing the risks well, or not communicating it well. Each of the functional aspects have different areas of risk that is important. And I think what is sometimes also lacking is that as the leads, we do not look at how the risks impact each other. So when we do work cross-functionally, do not remember to look at the risks of each function, but also if there's a risk in data entry being delayed, what does that look like for the statistician? What does that look like for the statistical programming team? So when you do your risk management, don't focus only on your functional area, but think about the holistic approach for the broader team. And then all of this, like we've all said, comes back to, if you don't have good communication, frequent status updates, with your entire team, that really is the recipe for not meeting your study outcomes.
Completely agreed. And if you don't mind, I'd love to add one thing, because that really triggered a thought in my mind about the clear communication. And this is primarily on the statistics side again, but I would say one of the most critical components to being a lead in the CRO setting is to manage the project budget in terms of how many units of whatever you've budgeted for. And one of the things the stats does is tables, listings, and figure production. And that clear communication is so important when you've actually drafted the statistical analysis plan and the TLF shells, because there you actually get your first look at the true number of outputs the study is going to need. And there was a budget built before that point. And now you have to take those two and kind of put them together. And I know from firsthand experience, sponsors do not like if you've budgeted for 50 tables and then you draft the TLF shells and now you're showing 300. That's a very large delta in terms of cost. And that might be fine. It might truly be needed. You might need that many outputs to get across the messaging of that clinical trial. And the sponsor will be okay with it, possibly, if and only if you come to them ahead of time and say, hey, I'm going to begin drafting the TLF shells now, just so you know the budget says 50. Based on what we're seeing in the database, we think that's way off. We do expect. So you're kind of walking them towards, and this is exactly Audrey's point, you're walking them towards, with constant communication, you're walking them towards being kind of a softer blow in terms of the budget hit. That's a pitfall you can really make easily if you just say, hey, here's your shells, it's 300, and now your price is increased by tenfold. So good constant communication. Awesome.
The same goes for if there's issues, right? So if that, what you've mentioned earlier, Bobby, is having that proactive management of the study as a lead. If you, from a DM perspective, see that you have certain sites that are really struggling, they are falling behind with data entry, they are struggling with managing their queries, you have a vendor for which the transfers are delayed, don't wait until the deliverable to mention this to the sponsor. You have your monthly meetings with them. Highlight this. It might not be something that's within your control, but if you highlight this in advance and say, listen, we're going to have a problem here. We have an interim database lock in 6 months, and we have only 20% of the data at site 1, 2, 3. That enables the sponsor to also work with the clinical team. You can proactively mitigate risks that might impact, and that really just enables that collaboration that we've all been talking about to lead to successful outcomes of the study.
Yeah, and I'm just going to jump in on one thing before we move on, because we've got a lot to cover. And some of this is going to jump ahead to the project management conversation. But it's important to remember, if you're at a full service CRO, you're going to behave one way. If you're at a biometrics CRO, you're going to behave another way. Anytime you're seeing these issues or risks to your study, make sure you keep your project manager involved. There's oftentimes, sometimes biometrics is a black box to a global project manager, and they don't really know. However, they do really want to help. So if you really are having problems, you have to go to an issue, you have a scope problem, you have a data issue, keep your project manager in the loop. They are there to support you and help you navigate how the communication is going with the sponsor. And they want to help you, and you don't want to put them in the space of not knowing of an issue and getting a call from an angry sponsor, much like you wouldn't want them to know of an issue and not tell you, and then you get an angry call from a sponsor. So just to underscore communication, I think that's what's the biggest trait of a lead is good communication and delegation skills. And it's also the biggest pitfall risk is that you haven't communicated